So I wanted to show you how you can make the fake acid effects in maxYMiser, and is kind of doing these effects in a controllable way was one of the motivations for doing maxYMiser in the first place. You could do them in the tracker that I used before, which is musicmon 2, but you didn't have the level of control that I wanted. And that kind of frustration was part of the reason why I went to do maxYMiser. So they're all over my tracks, these acid effects, and of quite a few other people's these days as well. So I want to show you how I do those. There's two main techniques. So let me start by doing the Wasted Years riff. Cool, so we want to acidify that now. So here's the first acid instrument. So I'm going to set the volume to maximum throughout the whole sound. I'm going to enable the square wave and the buzzer. I'm setting the buzzer wave to 8. If you go to help and gwEm, you can see the list of all the waveforms from the buzzer. And I happen to know that 8 is this sawtooth wave. So I'm going to remap the instrument on this channel to use that new sound that I've created. So it will have the sawtooth wave and the square wave playing at the same time. It won't be acid just yet, but this is only the first step. So that is the sawtooth wave and the square wave together. Now they're at the same frequency, so they are phasing in and out of each other. So what you have to do is to detune the square wave with the buzzer. So I like to do that with the arpeggio sequence on the square wave. And I'll select arpeggio and press N to create a new arpeggio sequence. And then I will just make that sequence as long as possible, which is 32 steps. And I'll repeat on the last step so that it basically doesn't repeat. Now if you go into the SE extension here, you have this little sequence editor extension, and I can put in some values and it will automatically generate the sequence here that I'd like. So let's go for a couple of octaves up. So that's just created a downward sequence going from hex 18 down to 0. You can see that here, what it's doing. It's just dropping automatically. So let's have a listen and see how that ends up sounding. Right, clearly it is aciding now, but it's a bit strained, isn't it? It's probably, in reality, the wrong octave. So I'm going to go and transpose that in the transpose menu. Let's try it now. All right. That might now be a bit too high. Let's go back down an octave. A bit low, but I can tweak this is why the sequence editor here is quite good, because I don't have to go in and edit every step. So let me just try and make that a little higher pitched. So these acid effects always do need a bit of tweaking. There's no one fixed way of doing it. So I'm going to have it so that the acid drops a little less to a little higher frequency. See how that sounds. That's quite good. If I enable the fixed detune here on the square wave, I can transpose the whole of the square wave up and down. That sounds pretty good. I'm quite happy with that. So what I've done there is to, because I felt the longer notes were a bit too drawn out, what I've done is to change the sequence again so that it has a wider sweep. So those longer notes have a more defined kind of decay. maxYMiser has a transpose effect, which is the T command. Now, if I enable the T command transpose on the square wave only, it will give me the ability to do like a cutoff sweep. Because it's only transposing the square wave and not the buzzer. What's happening is that the buzzer is being ring modulated by the square wave, which gives it that squelch. So if I transpose only the square wave, it will keep the note that the buzzer is playing, but it will change the pitch of the modulation, and we can make it sound like the cutoff is going up and down. So I'll kind of demonstrate that now. I've put the T command in on every step, and I'll just put some values in to give it like a kind of a sweep. You can hear the cutoff rising there quite well. Let's see how high you can take it. Just like with real acid, as one of my pet peeves is that sometimes people go too far with the cutoff, and it's like you kind of go beyond extreme into like silly, really. I mean, that's still sounding quite good, but at some point it will stop sounding good. Let's keep going though. Let's see how far we can push it. I haven't done a test like this for quite a while. I mean, that's all sounding good. Let's stick a 1 in front and really. That sounds even better. What am I saying? What did Yngwie Malmsteen say? More is more. Because that sounded so good, I'm actually going to add that to the fixed detune here. Yeah, you can kind of hear it now. Becomes a bit less aggressive now because those aggressive high frequencies are starting to be lost now. So I'll go down a little bit in my fixed detune. That's quite nice like that. I'm quite pleased with like that. So that is basically the first acid technique. And that's not using any timers whatsoever. That is purely using the buzzer and the square wave. And so it is a very low CPU technique as well. But let's listen to the components of the sound. So this is the buzzer. That's your sawtooth wave, and it's being ring modulated with this square wave, which sounds pretty ugly, but together the sawtooth and the square wave ring modulate and make that. But you can do other ring modulations as well. So I'm going to leave the square wave and I'm going to turn off the buzzer, but I will enable now the SID voice. So that means I can define my own waveforms using the timer. So I'll start just with a square wave. So that's now a SID square wave being ring modulated with a YM square wave. So it does sound quite square wavy, but you can fake in this with this technique a sawtooth wave using the SID. So what I've done is to create a 16-step waveform, which is just a downward ramp, so when that repeats it will make the sawtooth. Now the cool thing with doing that is that first of all, not only can you set whatever waveform you want to be ring modulated, but you can also then control the volume. So when you do a buzzer, if any buzzer effect on the ST takes out the ability to use volume, you're always at maximum volume effectively. But as soon as you switch to using a SID voice, you can then get your volume control back. So I'll just demonstrate that. So that won't work if I change to using the buzzer. It's just all full bore. There's only one buzzer on the ST. So if you wanted to have an acid effect and a buzzer bass at the same time, you can't do that unless you use a timer. So now we've got two channels, one which has got sawtooth wave and one which has triangle wave. So let's switch between them. So this is sawtooth. And this is triangle. Now I'm going to show you another technique to do acid. So this is the ring modulation technique really, where you use the buzzer and the square wave, or a SID wave and the square wave. But there is another way you can do it using the legendary Syncbuzzer. So it just uses the buzzer, and what you do while it's running is you re-trigger the buzzer at an audio rate. You use the timer to do that. And it's a bit like a oscillator sync effect on a classic analog synth, really. And it does sound a lot like a synth which has oscillator sync, like the Sequential Circuits Pro 1 is a very good example. So if you think of Robot Rock by Daft Punk, the intro to that is using oscillator sync. And you can kind of hear it's a similar, it's exactly the same principle with Syncbuzzer. So when you make a Syncbuzzer sound, it's a lot like making a normal buzzer sound at the beginning. You need to have a volume sequence which is at the maximum. And you need to enable the buzzer. And when we get really into this effect, the buzz wave column here, or the buzz wave field, doesn't really have much effect anymore, since we're going to set the buzzer wave with the timer. But just to show you that we're getting a sound, I will set it here. Just keep in mind it will be overrided later. there we go. That's just the buzzer again. So what you want to do to enable Syncbuzzer is enter a B in this column here, the final mixer column, which is the timer effect column, and B is Syncbuzzer. And then in the timer sequence, we can start entering waveforms. So I'm going to enter buzzer waveform 8, which is the sawtooth, but we're going to try others later. This is just to get the sound dialed in. So let's listen to it now. It probably won't sound too much different. So it's an octave higher, and it doesn't sound too special. And the reason is that we haven't started to sweep the frequency of the buzzer yet. But I'm going to do that now. And the way that I sweep the frequency of the buzzer is to enable the arpeggio here in the buzzer column. And I'll create a new arpeggio sequence, and I'll do all the same things as I did with the ring modulation technique. Make it as long as possible, make it repeat at the end, so basically it doesn't repeat. And then I'll just put in a simple downward ramp. Let's see how that sounds as a starting point, and then we'll start tweaking the settings. That's not bad start, actually. You can hear it's sync buzzering quite nicely. Let's reduce the amount of that arpeggio sequence. That's nice. And then I can do the same as I did in the ring modulation technique. And with the fixed detune, I can start tweaking the cutoff, if you like. Somewhere around there is quite nice. When you start messing around with this, you'll notice that there's like a kind of a periodic effect when you adjust the detune. So unlike with the ring modulation technique, where you could just continue to increase the amount of detuning and it would squeal more and more, that's not actually the case with the Syncbuzzer, because it depends how many waveforms of the buzzer fit into your timer. So you can hear that generally it does get higher in timbre, but there is a periodic nature to how it does that. Now that's a great question, Gunstick. If you don't use repeating buzzer, how does the detune then work? It works exactly the same, actually, as with a repeating waveform. Except the one difference is, as you increase the frequency, the sound gets quieter. I'll demonstrate it to you. So when we go into the help section, we can see at the moment we're using buzzer waveform 8, which is the sawtooth. Let me change that to just one oscillation of sawtooth with the waveform 0. Now it will sound a lot the same at lower notes because there's only one repeat. But as you go higher, because it's a non-repeating waveform, you only get one oscillation. Do you hear it, how it got thinner there? And I can do the same thing with the transpose. I've already programmed the transpose, so let me enable it on the buzzer and you'll hear the cutoff sweep up and down. This is the technique with the ring mod. Let's compare it to the technique with the Syncbuzzer. Totally different. It's hard to express a preference, really. I love them both. But you have to bear in mind that Syncbuzzer is using a timer, which may or may not be appropriate. And not only is Syncbuzzer using a timer, it's also using the buzzer. But that's not all you can do with the Syncbuzzer. Now, I used to think of this as a kind of a secret trick, but it's not really. Tao himself talks about it in his famous interview where he went into the Syncbuzzer technique. And he mentioned that at the time of the interview, which was around 2000, I suppose, that he was just starting to play with the idea. So I thought I would try it as well when I program my own Syncbuzzer. How it works is this. This is something that you can't do on a synth. Now, each time we're re-triggering the waveform, we're starting fresh a new sawtooth wave. Every single time we do a sawtooth wave, right? But you can add extra steps in this sequence. So you can, on one cycle, do a sawtooth wave. And then on the next cycle, you can do a triangle wave. And you can add even more steps. So you could do a sawtooth wave, a triangle wave, a non-repeating wave. As many steps as you like, really. And that starts to make the Syncbuzzer sound very interesting, actually, the more waveforms you start to add. So let's do a simple start. Let's do sawtooth wave and then triangle wave. Let's hear what the difference is with that. So this is only sawtooth triggered. And that's alternate sawtooth and triangle. I love how that sounds when you start adding the waveforms. So you've got the aggressive harmonics of the sawtooth wave, but the low end of the triangle. And I don't know any other synth that allows you to change the waveforms of the oscillator sync while it's running. So we have this list of waveforms. Now you've got 8 different waveforms. Even with 2 steps, you've got 8 waveforms and 2 steps, giving you a lot of combinations. Let's just try a few different ones. That one's quite nice. And they don't all sound very acidy. Some of them really start to bring out a different kind of warmer synth character. So with those 8 waveforms, with 2 steps, you have already 64 possibilities for different sounds that you can create. You've got to fit in with other instruments in your track. So quite often you find that some of these combinations of Syncbuzzer waves are really loud. So you'd end up messing with the waveforms and some of these non-repeating ones give you the opportunity to make your Syncbuzzer a bit quieter. I'm just here using 2 steps. maxYMiser will allow you to just keep stacking waveform changes. This is quite a nice combination. So the first time it syncs, it does the downward ramp. Second time it syncs, it does the upward ramp. And then I've gone into the sawtooth wave. When I switch between 8 and C, which are the 2 different phases of the sawtooth wave, it actually changes the sound in quite a noticeable way. And C is sounding more aggressive, even though it's just the same waveform swapped by 180 degrees. And the reason is, it's just come from D. The YM will be high at that point, and then we've switched immediately down to 0 at the start of that sawtooth wave, whereas which will give us a high harmonics, because we've effectively got an impulse there going from maximum to minimum volume. Whereas 8 sounds less aggressive because it has a downward ramp at the start. So it will go from this high and it will swoop gently down to the low, so it will be a bit less aggressive. And I think part of the fun of the Syncbuzzer is that you're never exactly sure when you start messing with these waveforms exactly what you're going to get out of it. Hopefully you guys learnt something or found it interesting, or maybe just like the sound of that Iron Maiden riff.